Hey guys, how's it going? It is Kara here with another Infinite Magicraid video, and in today's video I want to talk about bleed. And for the most part, bleed is not that good of a debuff. And I want to explain why, compared to HP burn and poison, why it's not getting played nearly as much. And I think there's going to be a couple factors here. We're going to talk about how the damage is calculated, how the game modes affect bleed and why they're not really being used that much, and a particular game mode that is actually pretty good for your progression that I think bleed characters can actually excel in and make them to where they're not completely worthless at the moment here in this game. And there is some good bleed heroes, I didn't want to say that, but for the most part I want to explain why they feel so much more underwhelming compared to HP burn and poison, because I feel like those two debuffs really have a place in this game, whereas at the moment there's really no top tier bleed character here in this game. So here is going to be the first part, is just how the damage is calculated. I'm just going to kind of give you guys an example here on why bleed just doesn't do that much damage, and we got to start with how it is calculated and the difference between a bleed and an HP burn character, because for the most part people have an idea of how much HP burn characters do. They're the premier dot debuff. This is going to be the characters that are all like S tier when it comes to tier lists and stuff like that. And what they do is HP burn here. So HP burn is takes damage 8% of the max HP of each turn before action when self is under HP burn status. The damage caps at 30% of the attacker's max HP and ignores defense. Stacks up to 5 layers here. So that's either going to be 8%. Usually when it comes to content, the waves of enemies, you're going to be taking 8% of their max HP, but when against a boss, 8% of their max HP would be like 1,000,000 damage, you know, and in some bosses even more than that. So it's not going to be that much damage. It's going to be capped to 30% of your HP, which most people, you know, could be ranging anywhere from 300,000. I've seen all the way up to like 600,000 HP. So 30% of that. And then you have the boost of your mastery. I did a video explaining this, but the mastery is just an increased percentage. So let's say you're doing 120,000 damage, you times it by this percentage here as just a modifier, and that's going to increase your damage. So mastery is the same way. It calculates the same when it comes to HP burn, when it comes to bleed. I haven't tried poisons, but I'm assuming it's going to be the same for poison as well. So that's how your damage is calculated as an HP burn, whereas bleed, it's going to take a little bit more. The damage is going to stack based on how many bleeds you can actually inflict on a character. Right here we got bleed, so takes this a varying percentage based on how many stacks you got here of attack damage, the initiator each turn before action based on the number of bleed layers. The damage ignores defense, stackable up to 10 layers. So this right here could go from anywhere from only 30% of your attack to 165% of your attack with a whole bunch of stacks there. But it's going to be really difficult to get 10 stacks on an enemy there and make it consistent. So that is one of the reasons why bleed is just not that good in the first place. But let's take an example just and do the math. So let's just take an example for bleed in the best possible terms for a bleed character. I'm just going to hypothetically give a bleed character a ton of good stats here, and we'll see what kind of damage we can expect, and then compare that to an HP burn character. So like, let's say we have 350,000 attack, we have 80% affected, and 120% mastery. So those are good stats right there. And we'll say when you're at 10 stacks, that's 165% of your attack damage, and then plus this 120% damage boost with mastery here, that is going to do 127,050 damage right there. But let's compare that to an HP burn character against a boss, because how else are we going to stack 10 stacks? It's just not going to happen unless it's like a boss where you're going to be needing to attack him multiple times. If it's a wave of enemies, getting 10 stacks is just not going to happen. So, or it's just not realistic. Whereas for the most part, we're taking these bleed characters in to be able to get a ton of stacks and be able to beat a boss. So let's take an HP burn character with 400,000 HP, and we're against a boss. Let's say he has like, you know, 5 to 10 million HP. So there's no way we're going to be doing the 8% damage. We're going to be doing the 30% of our max HP as our damage base. We'll take 0 mastery. We don't need any of that. And we're already doing 120,000 damage to that boss per tick. So as you can see, that's so much easier to be able to do that. Not only did we not have to stack up 10 layers of bleed to be able to do similar damage, we also get a spec into survivability, because these dungeons are actually really hard and surviving is difficult. We spec into survivability, and we don't even need mastery, and we're already doing pretty much better, if not, you know, best case scenario version of a bleed character. So that's pretty depressing as a bleed character, that difference there. So in this game, the reason why I'm still bringing it up, because ideally if we could just pick a HP burn character, for the most part we're always going to just pick the HP burn character. You know, it's just not going to be a realistic thing to be able to try to force a bleed character when you can have this big of a disparity in your progression, especially early. As the game goes on further, we're going to need to change and pick different characters, such as, for example, in the Tower of Mark, we're not going to be able to just always have whatever our best character is. Like, for example, Hazonia's stuck to the green side. We have Sigmund over here in the red. We have Achman and Melia here second force. I don't believe there's really any HP burn character on Blue Mark, for example, so that's going to be a situation where we might need to consider other characters. Faction Abyss is a really big deal here eventually down the line if we want to be able to push up these rewards here. Currently, we have Agatha here at 600, but I believe there's a rumor that she's going to move down to 450, which makes it actually reasonable, because at the moment, getting her is just not even worth considering, because my best team here is beating stage 20. I would have to beat stage 20 and duplicate that 10 times if I ever wanted to get Agatha at the moment as it currently stands, which is just ridiculous, let alone for the average person. So I heard that she's going to be easier to get. So then that's encouraging more diversity in your roster here. So we got to consider other characters. We got to understand how bleed works there. So there is a reason to actually use bleed characters, and just the nature of the RNG amount of pulls, maybe you just don't pull an HP burn character. You're a ways off from getting Achman guaranteed. So you need to have an HP burn character where they're actually going to excel. So for the most part, we got to resign ourselves to the fact that they're not going to do nearly as much damage as an HP burn character, or at least not as easily. But there is a couple factors that we can boost that the bleed character gets a benefit of, where the damage that they're doing on their dot is also directly increasing the damage that they do on their normal moves, where that's not necessarily the case when it comes to a HP burn character, which is pretty nice. Also, there's other boosts in game that you can do for bleed characters, such as attack boosts, where that's going to also increase your dot damage. So if you have a character like, for example, Slaville here, she gives a 40% attack boost. Then as you apply those bleeds, they're going to be doing more because you have now a higher amount of attack there to be able to boost that, which is pretty great too. But also conversely, you got to worry about attack down, and that's going to also affect your bleeds, whereas that's not necessarily the case for HP burn characters. So there is that as well. But that is, for the most part, why bleed doesn't feel that good. Also, at the same time, we just got to look at the characters here. I think the first thing we got to do is look at the game modes that we actually care about. And a lot of it, I think a lot of people are just on the campaign here, and they want to be able to quickly be able to beat these stages to ideally be able to 3-star them. So you got to beat them under 100 turns. You got to be able to do damage quick, and bleed characters just do not fit campaign at all when it comes to this, because you need a ton of stacks, need a lot of turns to do that, and you have 5 enemies to do it, and there's not many good AoE bleed characters that can put up stacks relatively quickly. That is more so for poison characters. They're great at being able to do AoE damage and be able to clear waves quickly with a ton of poisons in an AoE manner, and how their damage is calculated, it's they get the 100% damage amount immediately, whereas it takes about 4 to 5 stacks on a bleed character to be able to do the equivalent amount of damage. So that is another reason why I think a lot of people don't care about bleed characters, is because they don't really fit where most people want, where you're either going to be trying to clear the campaign, or like, let's say you want to do dungeons. They will excel at the end here on the boss, but if you have an HP burn character, you're going to just pick the HP burn character instead of them, and they don't do that great on the waves of enemies beforehand, because they're more so focused on stacking up a ton of bleeds, which is usually like a single target thing. So that's another reason why I don't think bleed characters are getting played that much. So where do they actually fit in? And I think the place that they could fit in at the moment is going to be Guild Boss here. One thing, like I was saying earlier, when it comes to their attack and how getting it reduced is going to ruin their, or lower the damage on their dot, he ends up having a pretty consistent attack down here, but we do have 20 turns that we can actually stack this up. Bleed characters at the moment are going to excel the most. They might not necessarily be the best characters, but I think if you build a team around them, they can do a lot of damage here and help boost up your Guild Boss score. We have a couple options here when it comes to them. For example, I think the premier one is going to be Elena here, because she has this awesome passive here where she refreshes the duration of the bleed characters here. So it deals 25% attack to all enemies with 3 or more layers of bleed, and resets the duration of bleed on them at the end of any ally's turn. So that right there means that she's like absolutely S tier for a bleed character. I think probably the perfect combination is going to be probably 2 bleed characters, maybe 3, and then try to consistently get that bleed stack up and keep it at 10 the entire duration. And you probably want to have a character that can remove or prevent debuffs, because you really don't want to have that attack down consistently, and then it happens once every 3 turns in the Guild Boss there. So that's definitely a problem that you're really going to want to affect. You're also going to want to have an attack booster to make sure your bleeds are hitting even higher than they would normally. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So it's going to be really difficult to finally get a bleed character online. There also is a good bleed character that's an epic hero in Reeves here, where that's not necessarily the case for an HP burn character. I think getting started with a bleed character is at least a little bit more free to play friendly versus an HP burn character where you got to get lucky with a legendary character, or you need to grind a ton until you can finally buy him out of the arena store here at 6,400 of this currency here, which is going to take absolutely forever. So that's another thing to consider there when it comes to this. So I think a lot of people, based on how the game modes work and how we got to separate our teams, eventually we're going to need to probably use some of these guys. They're not completely all bad, but that is why it feels bad, at least at the moment, based on what people care about, what people are actually pushing in this game, and just how the damage is calculated. But I feel like there is hope when it comes to these characters, because as we get better and better gear, it's going to at least raise the ability of the damage of the entire character with their skills and the bleed dot itself. So whereas an HP burn character, yes, we can increase it by more and more mastery and more HP, but I think there's a limit to that, whereas not necessarily for the bleed characters, or there's a lot more potential, I think, for bleed characters, because also the more crit we get, the more crit damage we get, all of that's going to be constantly increasing the damage there. Maybe we also get a buff too for bleeds to where they ramp up a little sooner. Maybe they can last a little longer, something along those lines to help them get to those higher percentage faster, so they don't feel nearly as bad. So I just wanted to have this kind of explanation here on why the state of bleeds, I guess, here in Infinite Magicraid. I do think they deserve a buff over any of the dots here. Poisons are, like, there's a lot of good poison teams out there. If people want me to talk about poisons, you know, I've gotten beat by a lot of poison teams here in Arena. I don't know if we're going to see one here, but they are pretty prevalent. And also I think they're probably pretty good in clearing waves for PvE as well. So I think poison's in a good spot, and it kind of differentiates itself from HP burn enough to kind of warrant that. But bleeds struggling a little bit. So here's what you guys think about it, and you guys have a good one. Peace.